It is a place that few humans ever see, the vast frozen expanse at the bottom of the world. But in the depths of snow and ice may lie some important clues to our future. Our Jerry Bowen has departed for Antarctica to bring you news of the important scientific experiments being conducted there. We begin our exploration this evening with a trip to the South Pole in a series called The Ice.
Summer at the bottom of the world. Antarctica, the continent that contains 70% of Earth's fresh water, frozen solid. A land of extremes where penguins skitter along the ice edge in 24-hour sunlight. And at the South Pole, 800 miles away and 10,000 feet higher, human visitors cope with 30 below zero weather.
I've got on my bunny boots, I've got 2 pair of socks on, I've got long underwear on, I've got on 2 pair of gloves, I've got a neck gaiter on.
Getting here means an 8-hour, 2,500-mile flight aboard a cargo plane from New Zealand, and it's not easy. Our first flight was canceled. Our second, boomerang, turned back by bad weather. The third try, we made it to the main American base at McMurdo, summer home to 1,100 people. Mactown has some creature comforts, ATM machines, health clubs. Bingo night at the local bar, and one mission, science. The National Science Foundation spends nearly $250 million annually in search of answers.
Antarctica is extremely important for understanding Earth's systems, whether it's related to global climate change or the origin of life on Earth, or in fact the origin of life in the universe.
At the South Pole, researchers are measuring the thickness of the atmosphere's protective ozone layer. It's normal this time of year. At the Ross Sea near the foot of a glacier, biologists drop a remote-controlled camera through a hole in the ice to document how Antarctic sea life can survive and whether unusual ocean warming may have killed this bed of clams. This is also Antarctica, the dry valleys where 100-mile-an-hour winds blow away the snow and ice cover, and glacial runoff provides nearly all of the moisture. It's a barren land in a time warp, raw, exposed, and virtually unchanged for billions of years. An extremely dry environment where man's short history is also perfectly preserved. The staging hut explorer Robert F. Scott left in 1911 for his ill-fated trek to the South Pole still remains with its contents. And Antarctica remains every bit as deadly for man.
In an aircraft accident, or if they're not wearing a lot of warm clothes when they go in, they can go in a few hours. We've lost somebody overnight, and he had the proper clothing on.
The worst accident this season, a cargo plane that slipped into a 130-foot crevasse. No injuries here, except to the pilot's pride. But the risk is part of the price for unlocking Antarctica's secrets. There are pieces to the puzzle of climate change here, and one by one, they're being revealed. Jerry Bowen, CBS News, Antarctica.
Jerry Bowen's series of reports will continue Monday and Tuesday on the CBS Evening News with Dan Rather. He'll also be filing reports for CBS This Morning and next weekend on CBS News Sunday morning. For more information on Jerry's trip, you can check out our website, cbs.com, or on AOL at keyword CBS News.
The barren depths of Antarctica, it's a vast, frigid place where few dare to venture. But there, beneath the ice, may lie the key to some of nature's mysteries, including El Nino. As CBS's Jerry Bowen shows you in the first of a 2-part report, what happens on this solitary continent may help explain some of the forces that affect your life.
The edge of the ice at the bottom of the world, and the whales are putting on a show. Cruising the newly cut shipping channel and spy hopping, as they call it, to see who's come visiting. It's a common sight for the crew of the Coast Guard cutter Polar Sea, breaking the summer ice to the American base at McMurdo. What's unusual this year, says Captain Gerald Davis, is the weather.
Well, this year was an unusual year. We had an awful lot of ice. 31 miles of ice we had to break to create this channel into McMurdo. Previous years seem to have been a bit milder than they were. It's definitely a cycle. It's definitely a cycle.
Scientists say it was last year's El Nino that disrupted Antarctic weather, and one researcher says El Nino may have very close ties to the continent. He noticed that when air pressure suddenly drops here, an El Nino soon pops up here. The pressure drop may be the El Nino signal.
As long as 1 year before the El Nino event occurs.
Is this the trigger for El Nino?
It could be the trigger.
National Science Foundation researchers working at remote field camps are looking into Antarctica's role in global climate change, and there's special interest in the stability of the Brazil-sized West Antarctic ice sheet. Its melting or collapse could cause catastrophic coastal flooding worldwide.
No disagreement that sea level would come up about 5 meters if it did happen. That's true.
The impact on New Orleans or Malibu being?
How long can you tread water?
Glaciologist Joan Fitzpatrick is not among the doomsayers. This new NASA computer model shows that over the past 20,000 years, the ice sheet's already lost 2/3 of its size, and it's widely believed any new melting would occur over several centuries. What surprised researchers, though, is how quickly a new meltdown could start, within just 4 years.
Major climate change can be accomplished in a very short period of time. Over the period of time it takes you to get through college, maybe.
And they know that from what the ice tells them. Within these ice walls, in this carved-out storeroom 20 feet beneath the surface, lies the climate history of the West Antarctic ice sheet. Hundreds of ice cores, each tens of thousands of years old. And scientists hope they reveal as much about the future of global climate as they do about the past.
Every year preserved in the ice, much like tree rings.
At the Seipel Dome drill site, researchers have been retrieving ice cores from a 3,000-foot deep hole, each one containing trapped air bubbles from ancient atmospheres.
At the bottom, we calculate that the ice is 80,000 years old.
Sometimes the brittle samples shatter at the surface, but each piece is like a page from the past, revealing temperatures, snowfall amounts, even wind direction. It's Joan Fitzpatrick's job to search for parallels to what we see now.
So we're trying to pull a record out of the past in order to enable us to predict the future of climate change.
500 miles away in Antarctica's dry valleys, researchers are taking a close look at some actual changes occurring right now. Melting glaciers. This year, the water runoff is 6 times higher than normal, and part of a trend.
That's not going out on a limb to say that the last 30 years have been warmer.
Hydrologist Diane McKnight says the finding is one small piece of the climate change puzzle, a puzzle that includes retreating glaciers and thinning sea ice in the northern hemisphere, and that other weather wildcard, El Nino.
There isn't really usually a smoking gun, but many pieces of evidence coming together.
And if the climate is getting warmer, say the scientists, this is where we will likely see the evidence first. The bottom of the world at the edge of the ice, the edge of change. Jerry Bowen, CBS News, Antarctica.
Now, tomorrow night we take you back to Antarctica, where scientists are searching for evidence of life on planets beyond our own. And that's part of our world tonight. For the CBS Evening News, Dan Rather reporting. Thanks for joining us. Good night.
It is 26 before the hour. Think Antarctica and you think cold. You should also think big. Antarctica is about the size of the U.S. and Mexico combined. But at any one time, you may only find around 300 women on the whole continent. How do they cope with the extreme environment? How does the environment cope with them? Correspondent Jerry Bowen begins a 2-part report on the land way down under.
Brutally cold Antarctica can be very hard on people, especially hard on women. Just ask Jules Uberawaga. She's the one driving the bulldozer, grooming the airport road at the main American base in McMurdo.
When I first came here, it was the military, shave your head, grow a beard, tell your wives it's horrible. No one could possibly do it but us. And so they didn't like women coming down here and ruining their story.
That was 20 years ago. Now, women make up nearly 1/3 of the workforce. Scientists, firefighters, drilling rig roustabouts, handling toxic chemicals.
It's a pretty men-oriented place, and now there's all these women show that they can do the job.
Robin Abbott is known as the helicopter queen, the one to call if you need a chopper. But even in the early 80s in Antarctica, she was an oddity.
You just noticed being looked at. You'd walk in a room and you could just tell people's eyes, you know, and heads would turn.
Now, she's the boss of a mostly female staff.
There's like, you know, women that drive the forklifts and all the fuelies. I mean, the majority of the fuels people that fuel all the airplanes and all the helicopters, there's more women than men, definitely.
Antarctica was virtually men only until the late 1960s, with notable exceptions. In 1935, the wife of a Norwegian whaling captain became the first woman to walk on the frozen continent. But American women weren't welcomed until 1969. Even so, it's taken them a long time to feel they belong.
We're the answer all, the notify all, and the mom for most of the continent.
At the very bottom of the world, South Pole Station,
Qantas 2905, South Pole 89er.
B.K. Grant is in charge of communications, airplane traffic to calls home. This last frontier became more civilized, she says, because of women.
We did fancy dinners, everybody dressed up, and we had candles and tablecloths, and it was really nice. And you're right, maybe that wouldn't have happened if we hadn't pushed it. Because even though the guys probably thought it was a little silly, they were all there, and they all enjoyed it.
Back at McMurdo Base, it still looks like a mining camp, but behind the doors of the wine bar, there are couples playing Scrabble. And over at the chalet, that's a ballroom dancing class moving to the music. America in miniature. Better, but not perfect.
From day to day, certainly there are examples down here where you feel slighted, or you feel that you're not just going to get you're not going to get the same opportunity, or you might be overlooked. But it would be false to say the same prejudice that is everywhere at large is still here. It's just nice not being a really small minority of any kind or color here.
Antarctica is no less brutal to people. It's just not the same cold place it used to be for women. Jerry Bowen for CBS This Morning in Antarctica.
Sure is pretty. So, just who goes to Antarctica? Tomorrow, Jerry Bowen introduces us to some retirees and others you may not expect to be living at the bottom of the world. For more information, visit us at cbs.com on the internet and on America Online, keyword CBS News.
Deep in the ice of Antarctica, a hardy team of scientists is looking for clues to one of life's enduring mysteries. Does life exist on other planets? Did it ever? Man has probed outer space for evidence of extraterrestrial life, but as CBS's Iceman Jerry Bowen tells us in the second part of his series, From Antarctica, some of the answers may lie right beneath us at the bottom of the Earth.
The C-130 lumbered out of the Antarctic sky into the American base at McMurdo with the rarest of cargo on board. Padlocked boxes containing possible evidence of ET, signs of extraterrestrial life, meteorites that scientists at the Johnson Space Center are waiting to take a look at.
What do you consider the most extraordinary sample?
Well, we don't know. That's the thing. We find these things that are pretty weird and we haven't seen before, and they're pretty special.
This otherworldly continent with its snow-white plateaus is the ideal place to search for darkly scorched space rocks that may have come from Mars or the Moon. And field crews funded by the National Science Foundation have been at it for nearly a quarter of a century.
These are quartz veins, aren't they?
The samples, nearly 200 recovered this season alone, are carefully packaged to rule out contamination questions, an issue that cast doubt on an earlier Mars meteorite believed to contain signs of life. That debate continues, and so does the search.
Usually find a couple of rocks that don't look like any meteorite you've ever seen before, but they also don't look like any of the terrestrial rock in the neighborhood. And you know, it may just be a strange piece of terrestrial junk rock, but it may also be the most interesting meteorite of the year.
In Antarctica's Dry Valley lakes, divers who look like they're suiting up for a space mission are also probing for clues to Martian life. And sometimes their mission is just as perilous.
Okay, Peter, got him, pull him in, let's go, pull him in.
A diver at the end of his safety rope under the 15-foot thick ice suddenly found all his air escape.
Pull in, let's go. Can I give you a hand?
His regulator had frozen open, but after a frantic 45 seconds, he emerged safely with his prize, lake bottom sample. Project leader Peter Doran says the Antarctic lakes resemble the Mars of billions of years ago, and primitive life forms in the sediment here may offer a guide to life there.
There's ample existence of water on the surface of Mars, so we expect that lakes like this existed. I'm actually convinced that it will be hard not to find evidence of past life on Mars.
The search for clues to Martian life is not taking place solely under the ice of the Dry Valley Lakes. Biologists are also looking inside the snow at the highest, driest, coldest desert in the world, the South Pole. But biologist Ed Carpenter didn't have high expectations.
Yeah, I was interested in trying to find out if there's a place on Earth, at least in Antarctica, where there wasn't any life.
Instead, with the aid of sophisticated microscopes, Carpenter found thousands of minute organisms, algae and bacteria. So small, he's still trying to confirm they're alive, though he suspects they are, which raises intriguing questions. Were they carried in by the wind, or did they originate in this harsh environment? And it suggests intriguing possibilities. This increases the possibility of extraterrestrial life?
I would say yes. Yes, there's a very, very good chance that, that life does occur extraterrestrially. Anyway, I mean, organisms will almost always find a way to adapt to really harsh environments, and perhaps, you know, an organism could make it in a place like Mars, in the polar ice cap, for example.
It's the last place you'd expect to find a serious search for signs of E.T., the cold, barren bottom of our world. But if life forms can make it here, maybe it is proof they've made it way out there. Jerry Bowen, CBS News, Antarctica.
Antarctica used to be a place where you'd find just scientists and explorers, thank you, but now the folks who sponsor travelers there are making it easier for a wide range of people to head to the bottom of the world. Correspondent Jerry Bowen reports on some of the more interesting and unlikely visitors to the frozen continent.
The Coast Guard cutter Polar Sea was slamming through the Antarctic ice, and there on the starboard deck, carefully sketching the fractured aftermath, was Rhode Island sculptor Gabriel Warren.
I'm awed by it. Any grand force of nature has that effect.
Warren is in Antarctica as part of the National Science Foundation's Artist in Residence program. His sketches become watercolors and one day will turn to sculptures, art with a message.
Ice is irresistible. A glacier can sweep whatever it wants in front of it. And so I get, I guess most importantly, I get implications of humility for our species that I think we constantly need to be reminded of.
Can anybody think of some other questions they want to ask Ms. Bergholz while you're sitting here?
New York City teacher Elke Bergholz has been reminding her students to keep up with their assignments. That's Elke on the internet from the South Pole.
So her answer was your teacher should have the ozone data.
Bergholz is at the pole to study research on the atmosphere's protective ozone layer, one of a handful of American teachers invited to the very bottom of the world.
To be able to come here to Antarctica and to express and bring back images, feelings, emotions, besides the science, of course, is the most awesome thing I can bring back for the students. So I do feel like a missionary to the Antarctic, and I'm probably going to be that way for many years to come, maybe for the rest of my life.
Everybody wave. Bye.
Visiting teachers and artists in search of inspiration may seem to be unlikely candidates for the Antarctic experience, but not as unlikely as Betty and Jim Wass of Grand Rapids, Minnesota. They're part of the small army of retirees coming here, and they've taken the idea of going south for the winter to a whole new extreme. That's Jim finding a part at the plumbing warehouse. And there's Betty in the cafeteria making sack lunches for the research teams working out of the main American base in McMurdo. Home is a dormitory room where the Christmas tree still stands with photos of the grandchildren. A night on the town, where it's always daylight in summer, is usually a walk on the same ground the first explorers traveled. When you told your friends back in Minnesota that you were going to do this?
They kept asking why. We said if you have to ask why, you wouldn't understand, so.
every range from, geez, that sounds great, to you guys gotta be crazy, so, you know, it's...
If it is crazy, Jim and Betty say they plan to do it again. They've got the bottom of the world bug. Where else can you go where the sun rises and sets just once each year. Jerry Bowen for CBS This Morning in Antarctica.
Sure is pretty. For much more on Jerry Bowen's trip to Antarctica, you can visit us online at cbs.com and at America Online, keyword CBS News.
Most places love tourists. Visitors spend money, look around a little bit, and then leave without taxing local resources. But at the bottom of the earth, some question the value of a tourist, as Jerry Bowen reports from Antarctica in his continuing series, The Ice.
The world's last unspoiled frontier is under siege. One day it was two Dutchmen celebrating their 1,500-mile trek to the South Pole. The day before, it had been 5 French adventurers.
Yes, thank you very much.
At McMurdo, the main American base, tourists are coming ashore by the boatload from their cruise ships, posing for pictures, poking around the old explorers' huts, if only for a few hours, and, like Washington, D.C. attorney Susan Sawtelle, pinching themselves in disbelief.
I wanted to do this as long as I can remember. It's gorgeous, it's a different planet, it's a different century. I can't believe I'm here.
Some 10,000 tourists a year are now visiting here at a cost of up to $30,000 each. A small number for a continent 1.5 times the size of the United States, but huge compared to the 1,500 researchers spread among the 28 different nations here. One tourist group even helicoptered from their ship to this remote American field camp. The scientists were gone, so the visitors walked in and signed the guest book anyway, observing, "Nice spread you have here." Scientist Diane McKnight is concerned.
In one way of thinking of Antarctica, it's becoming a very large international park, and there's no park rangers here. There's no clear way to identify who's responsible for these tourists.
Officially, the National Science Foundation, which runs the U.S. programs here, has no position on the growing tourist trade. Visitors are welcome to look briefly at American operations, but not stay. There's simply no room. Privately, American officials are concerned that too many tourists could harm the fragile environment or interfere with the primary mission of scientific research. And they're annoyed that some other countries see tourism as a business to develop. Christchurch, New Zealand, already the gateway for science personnel, sees itself as the potential jumping-off spot for an eco-tourist industry.
We would want people to be totally environmentally aware and educated on the science and the lessons that Antarctica can produce for us all.
So far, self-policing by tour operators is said to be effective in limiting tourist impact on the continent. But scientist McKnight worries it's only a matter of time.
My worst fear is a Club Med at New Harbor in the Dry Valleys. That's my worst fear. And it could happen.
Perhaps, but remember those French skiers who reached the South Pole?
Oh, yeah. A form of tourist, but sports tourist.
Sports tourist. Even after their 800-mile trek, all they got was a call home, a hot meal, and a cold place to camp until their return flight arrived. For now, there really is no room at this inn. Jerry Bowen, CBS News, Antarctica.
It's Sunday morning on CBS, and here again is Charles Osgood.
For most of us, the dreary, tiresome winter will be over in about a month or so. It's been tougher in some parts of the country than in others, of course, but there's always the solace, the certainty that it will end at some point. So we bring you now a respite of sorts, a story of summertime where the living ain't so easy. Summer at the South Pole with Jerry Bowen.
A typical summer day at the South Pole, 30 below zero with sunny skies. A would-be golfer exercises his fantasy. A young couple is heels up on a makeshift swing. Summer at the bottom of the world. Scientists launch balloons to measure the ozone layer. Construction workers add one more piece to the slowly emerging new South Pole Station. And over on the ice runway, a cargo plane has touched down. Everything,
Food, fuel, parts, and people. Everything comes here by plane. Those big white pieces sliding out the back are parts for the new emergency stairwell.
It's my understanding we need about 2 more flights to finish.
And keeping an eye on it all is Jerry Marty. He's the National Science Foundation boss.
Hello. Jerry Marty, NSF rep, South Pole. Welcome to South Pole Station.
And when a rare visitor treks in, he's the host, guiding the newcomer from the ceremonial South Pole, where pictures are taken, to the geographic pole, 90 degrees south, the true bottom of the world.
Okay, souvenir.
I had always, as a small kid, wanted to go to the bottom of the planet Earth. I've always wanted to work in remote parts of the world, and had a goal to work in Antarctica and work at the geographic South Pole station.
Jerry Marty is not alone. Each of the 200 summertime residents has a story. University of Chicago astronomer Bob Lowenstein is here to look back in time with an exotic microwave telescope.
We're looking at beginnings, whether it was the beginning of the universe, the beginning of stars, how they're formed, or even the beginning of galaxies and how they're formed.
Construction worker Larry Fordyce left Alaska in search of adventure.
I think it's probably the only place in the world where I can experience 120 to 130 below temperatures. Know what it's like to have it dark for several months, to experience one sunset, one sunrise a year.
At South Pole Station, the geodesic dome is the center of activity. A snow crystal cathedral of contradictions. Freezer locker doors that keep the cold out because it's cold enough outside to store ice cream. A place where beakers, the nickname for scientists, rub shoulders in the food galley with building crews. And home is just an email away when the satellite is up and running. At 2 miles elevation, it's the highest, driest desert in the world. So dry that equipment and supplies are kept in open-air storage yards. It's a place where people work hard, and one night each week, play hard.
It doesn't seem at all like the foreboding scene the British explorer Robert Falcon Scott encountered in 1912 when he came and wrote the words, "Great God, what an awful place." But then Scott had come in second by a month to the Norwegian Roald Amundsen in their great race to the pole. It would be more than 4 decades before anyone else came here. Then the race was between the Americans and the Russians. The Americans came in first, and they stayed.
For the first time in history, Old Glory is flying year-round on this continent.
The first permanent American station was built in 1957 to house a small staff of 18. The dome replaced it in the mid-70s. And in 2005, the dome will give way to the new elevated station that will be home to 150 scientists and support staff.
Somebody sitting at home is going to say, what kind of science is so valuable that they're spending $153 million in taxpayer money to give creature comfort to people at the bottom of the world?
The ozone hole was discovered at South Pole Station. There is continued monitoring of the greenhouse gas effects on the planet Earth. We're still learning a lot about a continent that's larger than the United States and Mexico combined. So there's still a lot of unknowns in terms of what could be discovered and what could be found here.
But South Pole Station is not for everyone, especially not during the winter, when daylight gives way to total darkness. The winter overstaff is carefully screened. Being confined with a small group of people for 8 months can cause serious problems. Psychologist John Nicoletti.
Everybody talks about, yeah, well, I think I can handle that winter, but then when the sun finally sets and it's night and it's night and it's night, one of the big things we see is depression and a sense of foreboding.
Hi, Katie Jensen here, and we're going to take you on a little tour of the station. Let's go.
Katie Jensen was station manager and supervisor of the 28 people who wintered over last year. Her video diary reveals the humor and hardship of life at the edge.
Hi, Katie.
We see the Bad Hair Day contest, Because fuel to heat water is so expensive, $12 a gallon, showers are limited to one every 4 days for just 2 minutes. Understandably, there are many bad hair day contestants.
And these are some of the various plants that we grow here.
At the South Pole greenhouse, cook David Zabowski nurtures the most coveted of products, fresh vegetables grown under powerful artificial lights. And in the galley, there's Drew Logan's weather monitor.
So you're telling me it's negative 91.6 degrees out right now?
Yeah, more or less.
And there are thoughts on what that weather does to people.
I mean, winter here is almost death-like. I mean, it's totally dark, and people just aren't moving as fast, and things slow down. You can almost, we're on the edge of hibernation here.
It's when you venture outside in the dark in the winter that the bottom of the world becomes especially otherworldly, as researchers sweep snow crystals off the microwave telescope that's been peering back in time, searching for the origin of the universe. But imagine for a moment that the scientists are in spacesuits, not parkas, and on a space shuttle, not a rotating telescope. And you suddenly understand why Antarctica is as close to outer space as one can get to on Earth. Katie Jensen's video diary ends in celebration, the annual sunrise. The long South Pole night has come to an end. Soon, the planes will come back. There will be 24-hour daylight. But the magic of the pole will not be lost. It will just be different.
I enjoy going to the geographic South Pole on some evenings and just stand there in solitude by myself and just realize that I'm alone. I'm at the bottom of the planet Earth. You look around, you realize how insignificant man is on the planet Earth. There's just a beauty that keeps drawing me back.
On our last day at South Pole Station, everyone was held in awe by that beauty. Scientists paused at their field projects. A crane operator drove his huge rig to the edge of a snowfield and parked just to watch. What we saw was a massive, shimmering halo filling the horizon, a combination of ice crystals and brilliant sunlight that create a phenomenon known as a sundog. 27 sundogs danced across the bottom of the world's sky that rare afternoon. Even that disgruntled explorer, Robert Falcon Scott, might have been moved to say, simply, "Great God, what a place."
Penguin's progress is a cautionary tale from the bottom of the world, reported by Jerry Bowen.
Nearly every year, David Ainley comes to a place few humans have ever seen, a tiny corner of Antarctica called Cape Crozier. It is home to the world's largest concentration of Adelie penguins, 500,000 of them on this 3-mile stretch of coastline. Every one looking like a haberdasher's dream come true, in black and white, wingtips and tails.
You know, maybe this is Adelie penguin heaven around here. If you're an Adelie penguin, this is really the part of the world where you want to be.
Or it used to be. This year, Ainley discovered something disturbing.
I've noticed something that I've never known to occur here, and that is there's a whole segment of what should have been breeding birds that did not breed this year.
In fact, without warning, the birth rate plunged 70% at the Cape Crozier colony, a missing penguins case that was unexpected, but with a clue that may lie just offshore, where there should be miles of pack ice and there is only open water.
Ice to the Adelie penguin is like trees to a songbird. You know, if you chop down all the trees, then all the songbirds will go away. If you lose pack ice in the Southern Ocean, then you lose the Adelie penguin.
And from what you're seeing this year in certain colonies, is that a concern?
If it's a better world where a penguin exists, then sure, it's a concern. Yeah, I think it's good to have a world with penguins in it.
And so does Connie Adams, one of Ainley's researchers working 100 miles up the coast at Cape Royds.
I consider it an incredible joy every day to come down here, and there's not a day that goes by, whether it's blowing or sunny like this. It's a great to be Antarctica kind of day. You know, we're in Antarctica, we're among penguins, and I leave here every day with this incredible joy inside of me.
But these penguins may also be in trouble, just like the ones down at Cape Crozier. Here, it's another unusually hot day.
And for the chicks, it's too warm. You can see them all. Look at them all
look at them.
panting.
They're just exhausted. These little guys out here.
See how they're all splayed out like that? They're trying to lose heat through their feet. Their feet are in the back, and their wings are stretched out, and they're trying to lose heat, and they're panting.
In some ways, the Adelie penguins are surprisingly like us. They work very hard to survive, and they commute to work, swimming up to 50 miles just to bring home the bacon. In their case, krill to feed their chicks. And just like us, they're vulnerable to the weather, extremely vulnerable to climate change.
Climate change is a politically charged issue, but a full century of a slowly warming Earth is a matter of record. In parts of Antarctica, temperatures have increased by 5 degrees Fahrenheit in just the past 50 years. In those regions, Adelie penguin colonies have vanished.
It's the song of the Adelie penguin, even though it's, I guess some would say, not very melodious.
Even in the best of times, life for an Adelie penguin is a struggle, starting with hopeful males trying to attract the attention of a willing mate over the sounds of thousands of others.
So it's really just saying, you know, this is me, and I'm available for pairing. Even though at this time of year, there's just like a lot of hot air.
Well, it's heartfelt hot air, I think.
And then building a sturdy rock nest to woo the mate. Rocks and pebbles keep the eggs off the wet ground. And in the penguin world, where bigger is also better, neighbors are constantly robbing each other to make home improvements. And once the couple has produced a chick, life becomes a non-stop effort to keep the youngster full and happy. Think of it in terms of feeding a teenager.
The chicks are just, like you say, they're one big belly, aren't they?
Yep. It's definitely just a stomach with 2 legs.
But feeding the stomach with 2 legs has just become more difficult. The sea ice the Adelies depend on is home to tiny shrimp-like krill, the penguin's main food source. Less ice means the birds must swim greater distances to find the krill. It also means they return with less food for their chicks. But there's another problem. With the parents gone so long, the chicks are more exposed to scavengers like the skua, a seabird that quickly makes meals of eggs and chicks alike. Part of the natural order, says researcher Ian Gaffney.
It tends to teach you about life and death on a more massive scale than you're familiar with as a human. And it's part of the ebb and flow that you have down here in Antarctica. It's in your face. It's very direct.
But nature is somehow bigger and more dynamic here, isn't it?
It's like traveling to another planet almost. It's about as far as you can get off the beaten path on this sphere that we're living on, I think. And you never get tired of it because of that. And these birds are sort of an ultimate little denizen of this environment.
One need only come to Scott's Hut at nearby Cape Evans to see that penguins have always been a fascination for study ever since the first explorers came to the continent. This was the staging hut for Robert Falcon Scott's 1911 expedition to the South Pole, from which he never returned. Everything here is perfectly preserved, freeze-dried by the cold environment, including this emperor penguin, a specimen from another time.
It was a time when penguins were regarded both as a biological curiosity and emergency cuisine. This rare film was taken at Scott's Hut in 1911, before his ill-fated expedition. Back then, running after the birds was considered a harmless diversion. And this is 1928 film of Admiral Richard Byrd's crew, herding the birds with sled dogs and teasing them with hand puppets. Both dogs and harassment of wildlife are banned, on the continent now. These days, it's a kinder, gentler science that's being practiced. Researcher Denise Hardesty operates a computerized monitoring station connected to a small bridge that weighs the birds as they leave the nest and return from the sea with food. Each parent inside this fence has been implanted with an individual barcode capsule, like the barcode on a grocery product, so they can be tracked. And their weight records reveal how far they've had to swim to find sea ice and food. It is one more indicator of the penguins' changing environment, and ultimately our own. Antarctica is recognized as the Earth's thermostat, churning out cold winds and waters that influence temperatures worldwide. This is where scientists are looking for an early warning of any change, of a climate that is getting warmer. And what is happening to the Adeles will tell part of the story.
On a personal level, do you ever worry about the future of the species?
I haven't really thought about not having Adelie penguins, because it would just be such an amazing change in the Earth that would have to take place in order for this species to disappear. I don't know, maybe you wouldn't want to live on the Earth then, because it would really be a total transformation of the Earth.
It would mean that a rocky place at the bottom of the world that few humans ever see would fall strangely silent, and that is hard to imagine.
Next up, Mail Call. We'll read from some of your letters when Sunday Morning continues.